The deaths of the 168 people who died in the April 1995 Oklahoma City bombing were violent, unexpected, and mourned by millions. Today, the man who killed those people died on schedule by lethal injection.
On June 11, 2001, after 6 years on federal death row, Timothy McVeigh was executed by lethal injection. But how did it come to this? How did a decorated Gulf War veteran become the mastermind behind the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history? It all started on April 19, 1995, when hundreds of federal employees, military veterans, civilians, and children began their mourning in downtown Oklahoma City. Parents dropped off their toddlers at the America's Kids Daycare Center, located inside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. Government workers clocked in. Visitors came to renew licenses, file paperwork, or grab coffee nearby. It was just another Wednesday. By 9:02 a.m., everything changed. A Ryder truck filled with nearly 5,000 pounds of homemade explosives detonated right outside the building. The blast was catastrophic. In seconds, the entire north face of the Murrah building collapsed. Concrete, steel, and glass rained down. 168 people were killed. Among them were 19 children, most under the age of 5. Names like Bailey Alman, a 1-year-old girl who became the face of the tragedy through a Pulitzer Prize-winning photo, and Chase Smith, who had just begun walking, were lost in the rubble. Federal employees like Special Agent Donald Leonard, Secret Service Agent Alan Witcher, and Social Security workers were killed instantly. Dozens more were trapped or injured. Over 680 people were wounded. The entire city was shaken. The nation was horrified. And while the rescue efforts began immediately, so did a far-reaching investigation to find out who could do something like this and why. Unnoticed by most, a Ryder rental truck rolled to a stop just outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. It was parked in a drop-off zone right beneath the daycare center. Inside the truck sat a massive bomb, carefully constructed over weeks by Timothy McVeigh and his accomplice, Terry Nichols. A deadly mixture of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, fuel oil, and explosives, all connected to a time fuse. There were no gunshots, no masked gunmen, just silence, then chaos. There was no warning, no claim of responsibility, and at first, no suspect. The deadliest act of terrorism on American soil up to that point had just unfolded in the heartland, and the nation had no idea who did it or why. Detectives began piecing together the puzzle. Amid the rubble, investigators discovered the axle of the Ryder rental truck, still intact and marked with a vehicle identification number, VIN. That number led authorities to a truck rental shop in Junction City, Kansas. There, a clerk recalled renting the truck to a man using the alias Robert D. Kling. He matched the description of a former U.S. Army soldier, Timothy McVeigh, but McVeigh was already in custody. Just 90 minutes after the bombing, he had been pulled over on a highway near Perry, Oklahoma, for driving without a license plate and carrying an unregistered concealed handgun. He was quietly held in jail, unaware that a nationwide manhunt was unfolding. When FBI agents connected the truck rental to his name and saw that he was already in custody, they moved quickly. Eventually, the name Timothy McVeigh surfaced as the prime suspect. He was officially arrested on April 21, 1995, and charged with murder and conspiracy to commit the bombing. Shortly after, investigators linked Terry Nichols, McVeigh's Army buddy, to the plot. Nichols had helped store and gather the bomb components. He surrendered to authorities in Harrington, Kansas, and was charged as a co-conspirator. A third man, Michael Fortier, later admitted knowledge of the plot. In exchange for testifying against McVeigh and Nichols, he accepted a plea deal and received a 12-year sentence. The FBI launched Operation OKBOMB, the largest criminal investigation in U.S. history at the time, interviewing over 28,000 people, collecting 3.5 tons of evidence and analyzing over 1 billion pieces of information. Every step pointed to McVeigh, the ideology, the planning, the execution, and now the case was heading to court. The trial began on April 24, 1997, in Denver, Colorado, after a change of venue due to the overwhelming media attention and public emotion in Oklahoma. Prosecutors painted Timothy McVeigh as a cold-blooded domestic terrorist, driven by anti-government rage and revenge. They argued that McVeigh bombed the Murrah building as retaliation for the federal government's actions at Waco and Ruby Ridge, events that, in his mind, symbolized government tyranny. The evidence was overwhelming. A receipt for ammonium nitrate fertilizer found in McVeigh's car. Eyewitnesses who placed him at the Ryder rental shop. Fingerprints on bomb materials. His own words in letters and interviews condemning the federal government. And Michael Fortier's testimony confirming McVeigh's intentions months before the attack. The defense didn't deny that McVeigh was involved, but argued that he had not intended to kill children and that his actions were fueled by deep ideological beliefs, not sheer malice. They did not claim insanity or mistaken identity. Instead, their goal was to avoid the death penalty, but the jury didn't buy it. On June 2, 1997, Timothy McVeigh was found guilty on all 11 federal counts, including conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and 168 counts of murder. On June 13, 1997, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The courtroom was packed with survivors and victims' families, many weeping, others simply silent. Justice, it seemed, had been delivered, but for the families, nothing could undo the pain. Timothy McVeigh spent the next 4 years on federal death row at USP Terre Haute in Indiana. He filed multiple appeals, including challenges to the fairness of his trial and the use of the death penalty. All were denied. During this time, McVeigh never showed remorse for the 168 people killed, including 19 children. Instead, he remained defiant, calling the bombing a legitimate act of war. He compared himself to revolutionary patriots and claimed he was fighting against what he believed was a tyrannical U.S. government. He gave several interviews from prison, including one with Primetime Live, where he coldly referred to the children killed in the bombing as collateral damage. His lack of empathy shocked the nation. He read extensively, followed news coverage of his case, and remained focused on his ideological beliefs, even preparing an essay justifying violence against the federal government. He became the first federal prisoner to be executed after the reinstatement of the federal death penalty in 1988. By 2001, McVeigh had waived his remaining appeals, saying he wanted the process over. He was ready to die, and the government was ready to carry it out. On the morning of June 10, 2001, the day before his execution, Timothy McVeigh woke up early in his cell at USP Terre Haute. He spent much of the day in silence, reading and writing. He received no visitors from family, though he had maintained written correspondence with his father and sister. His attorneys visited briefly, and McVeigh declined any spiritual counsel. His final meal was simple and stark: 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream, nothing more. On June 11, 2001 at 7 a.m., McVeigh was escorted to the execution chamber. He showed no resistance, no fear, and no emotion. As he lay strapped to the gurney with an IV line in his arm, he declined to make a verbal final statement. Instead, he left behind a handwritten copy of the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Its final lines read, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." He was pronounced dead at 7:14 a.m., just minutes later. Witnesses included survivors of the bombing and family members of the victims, some sobbing, some silent, others simply staring at the man who had changed their lives forever. After 2,182 days on death row, Timothy McVeigh's life ended with a calculated clinical silence, but the pain he left behind would never be so quiet. Some say justice was finally served. A cold and calculated end for the man who murdered 168 people, including children barely old enough to speak. But others questioned whether McVeigh's execution brought real closure. Survivors and victims' families spoke of the emptiness that remained, the wounds that never truly healed, and the pain that couldn't be erased with a needle. There were no real doubts about his guilt. He admitted to the bombing. He even seemed proud of it. But the bigger questions lingered. What drove a once decorated soldier to such violence? How did no one stop him sooner? And how do we, as a nation, reckon with the monsters we sometimes create? One thing is certain. This is a story that reminds us how a single act can end multiple lives, and how even in justice, there can be haunting silence. If this story moved you, consider this. Behind every headline is a broken family, a life taken too soon, and a system trying to hold it all together. Like, comment, subscribe, because stories like these should never be forgotten.